The disappearance of Johnny Gosch. On a quiet Sunday morning in 1982, a 12-year-old boy left his home in Iowa to deliver newspapers. He never came back. There were no screams, no witnesses, no clear trail to follow. Just an empty wagon, scattered newspapers, and a disappearance that would fracture a family forever. What followed was not just a missing child case, but one of the most controversial, disputed, and disturbing mysteries in American true crime history.
In a world filled with noise, some stories are lost in silence, forgotten files, unanswered questions, lives that vanished without a trace. From the shadows of the past, these cases still whisper for the truth. Welcome to Cold Case Archives.
The Disappearance of Johnny Gosch. Part 1. A Quiet Morning in Des Moines. Chapter 1. A Normal Sunday. West Des Moines, Iowa, in the early 1980s was the kind of place defined by routine, quiet streets, familiar faces, a sense of safety that came from knowing your neighbors and trusting the world outside your front door. Paper routes were part of that rhythm. Children delivered newspapers before sunrise. Parents watched from porches and kitchen windows. It was considered normal, safe, and ordinary. On the morning of September 5, 1982, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch woke up early, as he had many times before. It was Sunday. He prepared for his paper route, loaded his red wagon with newspapers, and stepped outside into the quiet streets of his neighborhood. It was still dark. The air was calm. Nothing felt wrong. His mother, Gosch, watched him leave. It would be the last time she ever saw him. Chapter 2. The route he never finished. Johnny followed the same path he always did, delivering papers to homes along his route. Neighbors later reported seeing him that morning, pulling his wagon, moving from house to house. Then something changed. Several witnesses would later describe a man in a blue car circling the neighborhood. One witness claimed they saw a man speaking to Johnny near an intersection. Another reported seeing Johnny place his wagon down and walk toward a vehicle. None of these accounts were clear enough to form a single narrative, but they all shared one detail. Johnny did not finish his route. When customers noticed missing newspapers and an abandoned red wagon, concern began to spread. By mid-morning, it was clear something was wrong. Johnny Gosch had vanished. Chapter 3. The first response. At first, authorities treated the case as a runaway or miscommunication. It was a common assumption at the time. Missing children were often believed to have wandered off or left voluntarily, but Gosch knew her son. Johnny had no history of running away, no behavioral problems, no reason to disappear. As hours passed, fear replaced confusion. The family contacted police. Searches began. The neighborhood was canvassed. Witnesses were questioned. But the trail was already fading. No physical evidence was found. No confirmed suspect identified. No clear direction established. By the end of the first day, Johnny Gosch was officially a missing child. Chapter 4. A City Without Answers. West Des Moines struggled to understand what had happened. There was no sign of violence, no ransom note, no phone calls, no explanation. Just an empty wagon and scattered newspapers. In 1982, the idea of organized child abduction was not widely understood by the public. The concept of trafficking networks, grooming operations, and coordinated kidnappings had not yet entered mainstream awareness. Most people believed danger came from strangers in alleys, not from quiet streets in quiet neighborhoods. Chapter 5. A Mother Who Would Not Accept Silence. As days turned into weeks, the investigation slowed. Leads dried up. Witness statements contradicted one another. The blue car was never identified. The man described by witnesses was never located. But Gosch refused to accept that her son had simply disappeared without explanation. She began her own investigation, She contacted other families of missing children. She studied similar cases. She spoke publicly. She pushed law enforcement. She challenged official narratives. What began as a missing child case slowly transformed into something larger. Not just a search for Johnny, but a fight to expose what might have taken him. Chapter 6. The beginning of a different story. Over time, Johnny Gosch would come to believe that Johnny's disappearance was not random, that it was not an isolated crime, that it was part of something organized. This belief would place her at the center of one of the most controversial narratives in American true crime history, a story involving alleged trafficking networks, powerful figures, and hidden systems operating in the shadows. A story that would divide investigators, journalists, and the public for decades. But in 1982, none of that existed yet. There was only a missing boy and a family waiting for answers that never came. Part 2. The investigation that lost its shape. Chapter 1. An investigation without a center. In the days following Johnny Gosch's disappearance, law enforcement faced a problem that would define the case for decades. There was no crime scene, no forced entry, no struggle, no physical evidence. Everything about the disappearance suggested speed and control. Whatever happened to Johnny occurred quickly, quietly, and without drawing attention. Police began by re-interviewing witnesses from the neighborhood. Accounts of the blue car and the unidentified man were documented, but the descriptions were vague and inconsistent. No license plate numbers were recorded. No clear facial features could be confirmed. The witnesses had seen something, but not enough to act on. Chapter 2. The first leads. Investigators explored the possibility that Johnny had been lured rather than taken by force. This theory fit the evidence. Johnny was known to be responsible and cautious, but he was also trusting. If someone had approached him under the pretense of asking for help or offering assistance, it could explain why there was no sign of a struggle. Police canvassed local businesses, checked reports of suspicious vehicles, and interviewed known offenders in the area. Nothing connected. The blue car was never identified. The man was never found. No physical trace of Johnny surfaced. As days turned into weeks, the case began to lose momentum. Chapter 3. The FBI and a wider search. Eventually, the FBI became involved, expanding the scope of the investigation beyond Iowa. Johnny's disappearance was added to national missing persons databases. His photo was circulated across state lines. Tips began to come in from across the country. Sightings were reported in truck stops, in shopping malls, in other cities and states. None were confirmed. The case became flooded with information that could not be verified. For investigators, this created a dangerous problem. Too many leads, too little substance. Chapter 4. The shift in thinking. As the investigation stalled, a new theory began to emerge. That Johnny's disappearance was not an isolated abduction, but part of a larger pattern. Other paper boys had gone missing in the Midwest around the same period. Some of these cases shared similarities: early morning routes, quiet neighborhoods, lack of physical evidence. To some investigators, this suggested something organized rather than random. But the theory was controversial. There was no direct proof linking the cases, no shared suspect, no confirmed network, only similarities. Still, the idea took root. Chapter 5. A family left behind. While investigators struggled, Johnny's family lived in a state of suspension. No body, no confirmation of death, no proof of life, just absence. Johnny Gosch refused to allow the case to fade into silence. She gave interviews, distributed flyers, and spoke publicly about her son's disappearance. She challenged law enforcement when she felt the investigation was slowing. Over time, her role changed. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She became a public advocate. Chapter 6. The first fractures. As years passed without answers, the case began to fracture. Some investigators maintained the belief that Johnny had been abducted by a lone offender. Others believed he had been targeted by an organized group. Journalists offered competing theories. Experts disagreed. Public opinion divided. The case no longer had a single narrative. It had multiple, and none of them led to resolution. Part 3. When the case became a controversy, Chapter 1. A story that grew beyond the files. By the late 1980s, the disappearance of Johnny Gosch had moved beyond a missing child investigation. It had become a symbol. For some, it represented the failure of law enforcement. For others, it became proof of something darker operating beneath the surface of American society. As the official investigation slowed, alternative explanations began to fill the silence. Not from police departments, but from civilians, families of other missing children, independent researchers, and advocacy groups. The case was no longer confined to evidence. It entered the realm of belief. Chapter 2. The trafficking theory. The most controversial shift in the case came with the emergence of trafficking theories. Noreen Gosch began to publicly state her belief that Johnny had been abducted by an organized network rather than an individual offender. She pointed to similarities between Johnny's disappearance and other cases involving missing boys in the Midwest. Paper routes, early morning hours, quiet neighborhoods, lack of physical evidence. To her, the pattern suggested planning, not randomness. She believed the abduction had been coordinated. This theory placed the case on a different path, no longer a search for a single criminal, but a search for a system. Chapter 3. Other missing children. As attention widened, other disappearances were drawn into the narrative. Children who vanished under similar circumstances, cases that had never been solved, families who had received the same silence from authorities. Some of these families connected with Noreen Gosch. They shared information, theories, and suspicions. They formed informal networks of parents searching for answers. This collective grief created a new investigative culture, one that existed outside official channels. But while the emotional connections were real, the evidentiary connections were not always clear. Cases were grouped by similarity of circumstance, not by proof of linkage. This distinction would become one of the case's deepest fractures. Chapter 4. National attention and dispute. As the theories spread, national media attention followed. Documentaries, books, and investigative journalists began covering the case not just as a disappearance, but as a possible example of organized exploitation. Some reporters treated the claims cautiously. Others embraced them. Some rejected them entirely. The case became polarizing. To believers, Johnny Gosch became evidence of a hidden system. To skeptics, the case became a cautionary tale about how grief can reshape perception. Law enforcement agencies publicly distanced themselves from claims of organized trafficking networks connected to the case. They maintained that no verified evidence supported such conclusions. This deepened the divide. Families felt dismissed. Authorities felt accused. The gap widened. Chapter 5. A case without agreement. By the early 1990s, the Johnny Gosch case existed in two forms: the official file and the public narrative. The official investigation focused on witness accounts, vehicle sightings, and missing person protocols. The public narrative focused on networks, conspiracies, and hidden systems. These two versions rarely intersected, and neither produced answers. Chapter 6. The cost of unresolved truth. As the years passed, something else happened. The search for Johnny became inseparable from the fight over meaning. The question was no longer just where is Johnny Gosch? It became, what does his disappearance represent? For his family, it remained personal. For the public, it became symbolic. For investigators, it remained unresolved. The case no longer belonged to a single group. It belonged to history. Part 4. The night. Everything changed again. Chapter 1. The claim. In 1997, 15 years after Johnny Gosch disappeared, the case took a turn that would redefine everything that came before it. Noreen Gosch made a public claim that stunned both investigators and the public. She stated that Johnny had come to her home in the middle of the night. According to her account, a man appeared at her door, frightened and cautious. He allegedly told her that he was Johnny Gosch, now an adult, and that he had come to see her briefly before leaving again for his own safety. She said he was accompanied by another man, described as a guard or handler, who waited nearby. The visit, she claimed, lasted only minutes, but its implications were enormous. Chapter 2. The reaction. The response to Noreen's claim was immediate and divided. Some believed her completely. Others rejected the story outright. Many were uncertain how to interpret it. Law enforcement agencies stated there was no evidence to support the claim. No physical proof. No identification. No independent witnesses. No verification. From an investigative standpoint, the story could not be confirmed. From a human standpoint, it could not simply be dismissed. A mother claimed her missing son had returned. The case entered a new phase. Chapter 3. Belief vs. evidence. This moment marked the deepest fracture in the Johnny Gosch case. From this point forward, two realities existed. In one, Johnny remained a missing child with no confirmed sightings after 1982. In the other, Johnny was alive, trapped inside a system he could not escape. These realities could not coexist. One was based on documentation, the other on testimony. Both carried emotional weight. Only one could carry legal authority. Chapter 4. The identity question. Noreen Gosch stated that she recognized her son immediately. His voice, his mannerisms, his presence. To her, the recognition was not symbolic. It was personal. Critics questioned how identification could be made after 15 years without photographic confirmation or DNA evidence. Supporters argued that a mother does not forget her child. The debate became permanent. There was no way to resolve it. No test could be conducted. No identity could be verified. No proof could be produced. The claim existed outside the boundaries of investigation. Chapter 5. The case becomes a divide. From this point forward, the Johnny Gosch case was no longer just unsolved. It was contested. Some believed Johnny had been trafficked and survived. Some believed he had been murdered soon after abduction. Some believed the truth would never be known. Investigators remained bound by evidence. Families and supporters were driven by belief. The gap between these positions only widened. Chapter 6. A new kind of silence. After the alleged visit, the case did not move forward. No follow-up contact occurred. No further sightings were confirmed. No new evidence emerged. The story did not evolve. It froze. For law enforcement, nothing had changed. For Noreen Gosch, everything had. The disappearance of Johnny Gosch was no longer just a mystery. It had become a question of reality itself. Part 5. A case that divided a nation. Chapter 1. Media, Memory, and Myth. After the 1997 claim, the Johnny Gosch case entered a new and volatile phase. It was no longer just a cold case. It became a cultural fault line. Media coverage intensified, but it also changed in tone. The story was no longer framed only as a missing child investigation. It became a narrative about belief, trauma, institutional failure, and the boundaries between evidence and testimony. Some journalists approached the case cautiously, presenting the facts while acknowledging the claims without endorsing them. Others leaned into the controversy. Books, documentaries, and television programs amplified competing narratives. Johnny Gosch was no longer just a boy who vanished on a paper route. He became a symbol. For some, a symbol of hidden criminal networks. For others, a symbol of how grief can reshape reality. For others still, a symbol of how unresolved cases evolve into legend. The case was no longer contained by police files. It lived in public imagination. Chapter 2. The Credibility War. At the center of this transformation was a battle over credibility, not of Johnny, but of narrative. Law enforcement agencies maintained their position. There was no verified evidence that Johnny Gosch survived his abduction or returned home in 1997. No DNA, no documentation, no corroborating witnesses. From their perspective, the case remained unchanged. A missing child case with no confirmed sightings after 1982. But for Johnny Gosch and many supporters, the official narrative felt incomplete, even dishonest. They believed important information had been ignored or suppressed, that institutions had failed not only to protect children, but to investigate their disappearance properly. This belief created an emotional divide that could not be bridged by evidence alone. Because the dispute was no longer factual, it was philosophical. Chapter 3. When a case becomes identity for Johnny Gosch, the search for Johnny was no longer just about finding a missing child. It had become her life's purpose. Her public identity became inseparable from the case. She spoke at conferences, worked with advocacy groups, and became a prominent figure in missing children activism. For supporters, she was a symbol of resilience. For critics, she became a controversial figure. But both sides agreed on one thing: the disappearance had never ended for her. Chapter 4. The psychology of unresolved loss. Psychologists describe unresolved disappearance as one of the most devastating forms of grief. There is no closure, no confirmation, no finality. Families live in permanent uncertainty. The Johnny Gosch case became a textbook example of this psychological state, not just for the family, but for the public. The absence of truth allowed multiple versions of reality to coexist, and in that space, belief becomes as powerful as fact. Chapter 5. A case that no longer moves by the 2000s, the investigation had effectively stopped. No new evidence emerged. No new suspects were identified. No new verified sightings were confirmed. The case became static. It was not closed, but it was not advancing. It existed in suspension. Chapter 6. Legacy without resolution. The name Johnny Gosch became part of American true crime history, not because of what was known, but because of what was never resolved. The case changed how America viewed missing children. It influenced child safety policy. It shaped public awareness, but it never delivered answers. It left behind a question that refused to settle. What really happened to Johnny Gosch? Part 6. What can never be proven, Chapter 1. The last questions. More than 40 years after Johnny Gosch disappeared, the case remains open. No arrest, no confirmed suspect, no verified sighting, no physical evidence that leads to a resolution. What remains are questions that time has not answered. Who approached Johnny that morning? Who drove the blue car? Was the abduction planned or opportunistic? Was he targeted or simply vulnerable? And most importantly, did he survive? Chapter 2. The possible realities. There are only a few realities that can exist, even if none can be proven. In one, Johnny Gosch was abducted by a lone offender and killed shortly afterward, his disappearance becoming another tragic but ordinary crime that never found its perpetrator. In another, he was taken by an organized group, moved through unknown systems and survived, trapped in circumstances beyond his control. In another still, the truth is something simpler, darker, and less dramatic than any narrative built around it. Each version carries emotional weight. None carry proof. Chapter 3. The limits of investigation. The investigation into Johnny Gosch's disappearance failed, not because of a lack of effort, but because of a lack of evidence. There was no DNA, no crime scene, no digital trail, no confirmed suspect. The case occurred at a moment in history when technology could not protect children and could not track criminals. By the time systems improved, the trail was already gone. Time erased what evidence never existed. Chapter 4. The truth and the story. Over decades, the Johnny Gosch case became two things at once: a missing child investigation, and a story people told themselves to make sense of it. The truth is that no version of events can be confirmed beyond September 5, 1982. Everything after that morning exists in uncertainty. Belief filled the silence. Narrative filled the absence, but neither replaced evidence. Chapter 5. A mother's weight at the center of it all remains Johnny Gosch. A mother who never received an answer, never received closure, never received proof of death or life. Her search did not end, because for a parent, disappearance is not an event, it is a condition. Chapter 6. A case that never closed. Some cases end with arrests, some end with trials, some end with truth. This one never ended at all. Johnny Gosch did not become a solved case. He became a question that lives in records, memory, and silence. What happened to the boy who left home to deliver newspapers and never came back? Outro. The space where answers should be. There are crimes that leave scars. There are crimes that leave bodies. And there are crimes that leave emptiness. The disappearance of Johnny Gosch left a space where answers should be. And decades later, that space is still there. Unfilled, unresolved, unfinished. This has been Cold Case Archives, where some files remain open, not because they were forgotten, but because the truth never came home.
Some cases are never closed. Some questions remain unanswered, but every story deserves to be remembered. This has been Cold Case Archives.